Arman Cole, a former soldier who was seeking a peaceful life, but got caught between his past training and present dangers. Lena Cole, Arman's wife, who seemed ordinary at first glance, but was secretly part of a dangerous scheme. Mara Cole, Arman's younger sister, who was connected to an extremist group and involved in bomb-making. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Arman Cole lived a life that appeared ordinary to anyone watching from the outside, but beneath that calm surface was a man shaped by years of military discipline and silent trauma. He had served as a combat engineer in the United States Army, a role that trained him to build, dismantle, and recognize dangerous structures under pressure. When his service ended, he returned to civilian life, carrying habits that never faded. He woke before sunrise, kept his surroundings organized, and trusted routine more than people. Loud noises unsettled him, and unexpected changes made his mind race. Still, he tried to adapt, believing that distance from war would eventually bring peace. The small house he owned sat at the edge of a quiet Midwestern town where everyone knew each other's names but rarely their secrets. Arman chose this place intentionally. He wanted isolation, space, and predictability. The streets were empty after dark, and the nights were so quiet that even distant footsteps could be heard clearly. He worked as a mechanical technician at a local factory, a job that required precision but little interaction. His co-workers described him as reserved and reliable, someone who never missed a shift and never stayed late. At home, Arman focused on repairing old equipment and restoring broken machines in his garage. Fixing things gave him control, something he often felt slipping away in his personal life. His marriage to Lena had slowly grown distant. What once felt supportive now felt carefully managed. She handled finances, scheduled trips, and made decisions without consulting him. Arman noticed these changes but avoided confrontation, believing silence would prevent conflict. His sister Mara had moved in months earlier after claiming financial trouble. Arman did not question it. Family loyalty was deeply rooted in him, and saying no felt like betrayal. That evening, Arman left work earlier than planned due to power failure at the factory. The drive home felt routine until he noticed something unusual. Lights were on inside his house, even though Lena and Mara were supposed to be away visiting relatives. Their absence had been discussed days earlier, and Arman remembered checking the calendar himself. The driveway was empty, which made the situation even stranger. As he stepped out of his car, the air felt heavy, carrying a faint chemical scent that did not belong in a residential neighborhood. The moment he entered the house, a sense of unease settled over him. His training had taught him to trust instincts formed under pressure, and this feeling was impossible to ignore. Objects seemed slightly out of place. The silence inside felt forced, unnatural. As he moved deeper into the house, Arman felt the calm life he had worked so hard to maintain beginning to fracture, unaware that this ordinary evening was the first step toward a chain of events that would destroy everything he believed he knew. Arman moved slowly through the house, each step measured and deliberate. The quiet inside felt wrong, not peaceful but tense, like something waiting to be discovered. His eyes scanned the walls, the floor, and the corners of each room, picking up small details most people would miss. A thin layer of dust had been disturbed near the hallway, as if someone had dragged equipment across the floor. The smell he noticed earlier grew stronger, sharp and metallic, mixed with something sour that reminded him of explosives he had encountered during his service. His breathing became controlled, the way it always did when his mind sensed danger. Living room appeared mostly normal, but one couch cushion had been moved aside, revealing a scorch mark underneath. Arman's heart rate increased. Burn marks inside a closed house made no sense. He noticed extension cords running behind furniture where they had never been before. They disappeared down the hallway toward the storage room. That room was rarely used, usually locked, and filled with old boxes and unused tools. Seeing the door slightly open sent a wave of cold through his body. As Arman approached, he noticed faint clicking sounds coming from inside. It was rhythmic and mechanical, not random. He stopped just short of the doorway, his body stiffening as memories from combat flooded back. In war zones, that sound often meant timers or switches. He leaned slightly to one side, keeping most of his body behind the wall, and looked into the room without stepping inside. What he saw caused his hands to tremble despite his effort to remain steady. Metal pipes lay neatly arranged on the floor. Wires of different colors connected small digital components placed with careful precision. Bags of powdered material were stacked in the corner, labeled in ways that confirmed his fear. This was not junk or a failed experiment. It was a bomb in progress, and it was being assembled by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The room smelled of chemicals strong enough to make his eyes sting. Arman's thoughts raced. He tried to calculate how long it might take before the device became active. He scanned for triggers, switches, and possible remote connections. Nothing appeared rushed. Whoever built this had time, patience, and access to the house without raising suspicion. The realization made his chest tighten. This was not the work of an outsider breaking in. This was done by someone who lived there, someone who moved freely through his home. He backed away slowly, careful not to disturb anything. His mind searched for logical explanations, but none made sense. The house he considered a refuge had become a potential death trap. The device was placed close to the foundation, meaning the explosion would collapse the structure and possibly damage neighboring homes. The danger was not only personal, it threatened the entire quiet street he lived on. As Arman stood there, his sense of safety completely shattered, one truth became unavoidable. This was planned, and whoever planned it wanted the destruction to be complete. Arman retreated from the storage room and closed the door as gently as possible, careful not to trigger anything that might be connected to movement or vibration. His mind shifted into a mode shaped by years of survival training. Panic was useless now. He needed to observe, remember, and understand. He moved through the house again, this time with a sharper focus, noticing details that felt invisible just minutes earlier. The air throughout the house carried the same chemical scent, meaning the work had not been limited to one room. In the kitchen, several drawers were left slightly open. Tools that normally belonged in his garage were scattered across the counter. Measuring cups, normally used for cooking, were stained with residue that did not match food. A digital scale sat near the sink, wiped clean but not well enough to hide its purpose. Arman recognized it immediately as the kind used to measure precise quantities of explosive materials. The realization made his stomach tighten. This had been assembled piece by piece, quietly, over time. He checked the garage next. The workbench he took pride in was rearranged. Metal shavings covered the floor, and certain tools were missing. The welding torch had been used recently. The ventilation fan was running, even though no one should have been there. Arman noticed faint burn patterns on the concrete, consistent with pipe sealing. This confirmed what he feared most. The bomb was not rushed or improvised. It was carefully designed using his own equipment. As he moved back inside, Arman spotted something near the staircase that made his blood run cold. A familiar notebook lay partially hidden behind a storage bin. It belonged to Lena. She used it to track household expenses. When he opened it, the pages were filled with numbers, dates, and coded markings that made no sense as finances. Some entries matched the times he was away on night shifts or weekend overtime. These were the moments when the house would have been empty. Further inspection revealed more items that connected the device to people he trusted. A scarf belonging to Mara was draped over a chair near the storage room. It carried the same chemical odor. A pair of gloves used for cleaning, ones Lena insisted on keeping separate from his work gear, were stained with residue similar to what he saw on the measuring cups. The evidence surrounded him, closing in from every direction. Arman's thoughts struggled between denial and acceptance. He wanted to believe there was another explanation, something he had misunderstood, but each discovery removed another layer of doubt. The bomb was real, the threat was immediate, and the people involved had access, knowledge, and opportunity. What frightened him most was the precision. The wiring layout suggested the device could be triggered remotely or set on a delayed timer. That meant the person responsible did not need to be present when it exploded. It was designed to kill without warning. Arman realized then that this was not only about destruction. It was about control, secrecy, and planning over an extended period. Standing alone in the house, surrounded by silent proof of betrayal, Arman understood that the danger was closer than any enemy he had ever faced overseas. Arman sat at the small dining table, forcing himself to slow down as he laid out everything he had collected from around the house. His hands moved with discipline, but his thoughts were chaotic. Each item told part of a story he never imagined would involve his own family. He opened the metal box he had found hidden behind old paint cans in the garage, the one that felt deliberately concealed rather than forgotten. Inside were folded documents, flash drives, and sealed envelopes, all carefully protected from dust and moisture. This was not random storage. This was preparation. The first documents he examined were financial records. Bank statements showed accounts he had never seen before, opened under Lena's name but connected to unfamiliar institutions. Large transfers were marked with dates that matched his military reunions, business trips, and extended work shifts. Money moved in and out with precision, always when he was away. The pattern was unmistakable. This was not poor money management or secret spending. It was something far more calculated. He then noticed insurance paperwork tucked beneath the financial records. His name appeared repeatedly, listed as the insured party. The coverage amount was far higher than anything he would have agreed to. The policies had been adjusted recently, increasing payouts and changing beneficiaries. His chest tightened as he realized the implication. These documents were not meant to be found until after something irreversible happened. The flash drives contained more disturbing information. Detailed notes outlined schedules, routines, and structural weak points of the house. Diagrams of the foundation were labeled with measurements only someone with inside access could obtain. Arman recognized his own habits written down in cold detail. Wake-up times, work shifts, and even his nightly routines were documented with unsettling accuracy. It felt as though his life had been reduced to a predictable machine. Among the files were messages linked to extremist networks traced back to accounts connected to Mara. The content showed ideological planning, coded language, and references to symbolic attacks. The bomb was not only personal, it was part of something larger, something that could have extended far beyond the walls of his home. Mara's involvement was deeper than he had ever suspected, and Lena's financial actions supported it quietly from the background. Arman leaned back, struggling to process the full weight of the discovery. The people he had trusted most had not only betrayed him emotionally, but had turned his life into a tool for destruction. The plan was layered, designed to end with him taking the blame. His military background, the presence of explosives in his home, and his documented skills would have made the story believable to investigators and the public. What hurt more than fear was the realization that every shared meal, every quiet evening, and every moment of assumed safety had been built on deception. This was not an act of desperation. It was long-term manipulation. As the truth settled in, Arman understood that the danger he faced was no longer hidden in wires and metal. It was rooted in betrayal, and it had been growing inside his home for months. Arman spent hours reviewing the documents again and again, hoping that repetition would somehow change their meaning. It did not. Instead, each pass revealed new connections that made the situation even darker. He arranged the papers by date and purpose, slowly reconstructing the timeline of what had been happening behind his back. The plan had begun quietly, almost a year earlier, disguised as financial adjustments and harmless household changes. At the time, he had been too focused on rebuilding his own life to notice the pattern forming around him. The financial records showed growing debt tied to accounts under Lena's control. Credit lines had been opened using shared information from their marriage, but the funds were not spent on household needs. Large payments were traced to suppliers operating under fake business names. Arman recognized some of the materials listed on the invoices. They matched exactly what he had seen in the storage room. This was not a last-minute decision. It was an investment, planned with patience and precision. Mara's involvement became clearer as Arman studied the digital files. She had joined online groups that promoted violence under the cover of ideology. The messages showed how she gradually gained trust within those circles, offering technical insight she could only have learned from Arman's past work. She had observed him for years, absorbing knowledge without his awareness. His skills, once meant to protect lives, were being repurposed for destruction. More disturbing was how Lena's role extended beyond money. Notes revealed she was responsible for maintaining normalcy. She tracked Arman's emotional state, noting days when he seemed tired, distracted, or withdrawn. These observations were used to predict his reactions and minimize suspicion. The marriage had become part of the operation, a cover that allowed everything else to function undetected. Arman found a section of notes labeled with dates in the near future. They referenced a planned gathering at the house, an event Lena had suggested as a way to reconnect with the community. The bomb's placement now made sense. It was positioned to cause maximum damage during that gathering. The idea that neighbors and acquaintances could have been killed as collateral sent a wave of nausea through him. The final realization was the most painful. Arman himself was meant to survive long enough to be blamed. The evidence was designed to point directly at him. His tools, his background, his residence, and his access to materials would have made the accusations seem undeniable. The plan relied on his silence, his isolation, and his tendency to avoid conflict. As the full scope of the motive became clear, Arman understood that this was not driven by a single reason. It was fueled by greed, ideology, and opportunity. He was not seen as a husband or brother anymore. He was a resource, a shield, and eventually a scapegoat. The man who once believed loyalty could hold a family together now faced the truth that loyalty had been used against him in the most calculated way possible. The weight of everything Arman had uncovered pressed down on him until it felt difficult to breathe. His training had taught him how to handle external threats, but nothing had prepared him for an attack that came from inside his own family. The house felt smaller with every passing minute, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Every familiar object now carried a sense of danger. The place where he had tried to rebuild his life had become a trap designed around him. Arman's mind began to fracture under the pressure of conflicting instincts. One part of him wanted to walk away, to leave the house and never return. Another part knew that leaving would not end the threat. The device was still there, unfinished, but close enough to completion to be activated at any moment. The plans showed that time was a critical factor. Waiting for authorities felt impossible. If the plan moved forward, it would destroy more than just his life. Years of military conditioning took over as emotion collided with survival logic. His thoughts narrowed, focusing on immediate risk and irreversible consequences. Sleep deprivation, past trauma, and betrayal blended into a state where judgment became clouded. He began to view the situation not as a legal problem, but as a battlefield where hesitation could cost lives. That shift in thinking marked the moment when control started slipping away. When Lena and Mara returned to the house later that night, Arman was already broken in ways that could not be repaired. The evidence he had seen replayed endlessly in his mind. Every document, every plan, every calculated step they had taken felt like an attack that had already happened. The man who once avoided conflict now felt cornered, convinced there was no escape that did not end in disaster. What followed was fast and chaotic, driven by fear rather than strategy. The violence that occurred was not planned with the same precision as the bomb, but it was final. In the span of moments, the people who had shaped the plan were dead. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Arman had experienced before. There was no relief, no sense of victory, only a hollow emptiness that spread through him. As reality returned, Arman understood the magnitude of what he had done. The threat had been stopped, but at an unimaginable cost. He moved through the house in a daze, disabling the device using methods he knew by instinct. The bomb was rendered useless, its potential destruction reduced to scattered parts on the floor. The danger to the neighborhood was gone, but the damage inside the house was permanent. When authorities arrived, they found a man who no longer resisted anything. Arman offered no explanation and made no attempt to justify his actions. The soldier who once believed control and discipline could solve any problem now stood defeated by the consequences of his own choices. The line between protector and destroyer had vanished, leaving behind a tragedy that could never be undone. The arrival of law enforcement transformed the quiet street into a controlled zone filled with flashing lights and sealed perimeters. Neighbors watched from behind windows as officers moved in with caution, unsure of what kind of danger still remained inside the house. The discovery of explosive materials immediately elevated the situation. Specialized units were called in, and the area was evacuated within minutes. What began as a domestic crime scene quickly turned into a federal-level investigation. Inside the house, investigators documented everything with precision. The bodies were found in separate areas, confirming that the violence had unfolded rapidly and without warning. There were no signs of forced entry, reinforcing the conclusion that the incident involved people who belonged there. Arman was taken into custody without resistance. His calm demeanor confused officers, especially given the severity of what had occurred. Medical evaluations noted shock and emotional detachment rather than aggression. The bomb squad focused on the storage room first. The device was confirmed to be real and dangerously close to full activation. Experts noted the advanced construction and careful placement near the foundation. The materials used were not easily obtained, and the design reflected technical knowledge consistent with military training. This discovery immediately complicated the case. Investigators were no longer dealing with a simple crime of passion. As evidence was collected, the narrative began to shift. Financial documents, extremist links, and detailed planning notes were uncovered just as Arman had discovered them. Digital forensics revealed communication trails that supported the existence of a broader plan. The insurance policies, debt records, and event schedules painted a disturbing picture of intent. Slowly, the victims were no longer seen as entirely innocent. Media coverage exploded within hours. Headlines struggled to define Arman. He was labeled a decorated veteran, a cold-blooded killer, and a tragic figure all at once. Public opinion fractured sharply. Some saw him as a man who snapped under unbearable betrayal. Others argued that no discovery could justify what he had done. The complexity of the case made it impossible to reduce to a single explanation. Psychological evaluations revealed long-term trauma compounded by acute stress. Experts testified that Arman's decision-making had been severely impaired at the time of the incident. Still, the law remained clear. Regardless of motive or discovery, lives had been taken. Sympathy did not erase responsibility. As the investigation continued, authorities confirmed that the bomb was not symbolic or incomplete. It was functional and deadly. Had it detonated as planned, the damage would have extended far beyond the house. This revelation added a chilling layer to the case, forcing investigators and the public to confront an uncomfortable reality. The line between victim and perpetrator had blurred, leaving behind a case that defied simple judgment and ensured it would be remembered long after the headlines faded. As the case moved toward its conclusion, investigators continued digging through layers of information that had been overlooked in the early days. What they uncovered in the final phase of the investigation changed the meaning of everything that had happened. Hidden within encrypted files recovered from one of the flash drives was a detailed secondary plan. It outlined a timeline that extended beyond Arman himself and even beyond the house. The bomb was never meant to be an isolated act. The documents showed that the device was scheduled to be fully armed during a community gathering that Lena had been organizing. The event was designed to appear harmless, a simple neighborhood meeting meant to rebuild connections. The timing was deliberate. The explosion would have occurred when the house was full, turning a private betrayal into a public massacre. The plan also included escape routes, false digital trails, and messages prepared in advance to mislead authorities. More chilling was the confirmation that Arman was meant to survive the initial blast. The placement of the device and the structural analysis indicated that certain areas of the house would collapse differently. His usual location during such gatherings had been calculated. He would have been injured but alive, surrounded by evidence pointing directly to him. The extremist group connected to Mara intended to use the incident as propaganda, framing it as an attack carried out by a trained veteran who had supposedly turned against his own country. When this information was presented in court, it stunned even seasoned legal professionals. The narrative shifted once again, not to excuse Arman's actions, but to fully expose the scale of the intended crime. The prosecution acknowledged that the discovery of the plot likely prevented the deaths of dozens of people. At the same time, the law did not allow motive or prevention to erase the outcome of violence that had already occurred. Arman was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. He did not appeal the decision. Psychological evaluations described a man who accepted punishment as a form of final duty, a consequence he believed he had earned. He lived quietly behind bars, avoiding attention, his name gradually fading from public conversation. Outside the prison walls, the case became a subject of documentaries, academic studies, and ethical debates. It was cited as an example of how radicalization can hide within ordinary lives and how trust can be weaponized over time. The house was eventually demolished, the land left empty as a silent reminder of what had almost happened. The final truth remained deeply unsettling. A tragedy had been stopped, but only after another had already occurred. The story left behind no heroes, only consequences. It showed how easily lines can blur when fear, betrayal, and ideology collide, and how a single discovery can change history while still destroying the person who made it.